In less than 48 hours, one of the most feared and battle-hardened military formations on the planet walked directly into a battlefield that had been engineered patiently beneath the earth for more than 2 decades. The Golani Brigade, a unit whose reputation inside military circles is often mentioned alongside Britain's SAS and America's Delta Force, absorbed catastrophic losses inside a single sector of southern Lebanon. And the scale of those losses has shaken strategic planners far beyond the Middle East. To understand the true gravity of that number, you need context. During the entire 2006 Lebanon War, Israel lost 121 soldiers over 34 consecutive days of combat operations. What unfolded in the hills of southern Lebanon in March 2026 reportedly multiplied that figure by nearly 8, with one brigade in one operational sector in less than 2 sunrises. This was not a civilian massacre. This was not an ambush against untrained troops caught off guard. What happened was something far more consequential. It was the direct collision between the most advanced military technology the Western world has ever assembled and 20 years of subterranean engineering designed specifically to neutralize every one of those advantages. And the consequences are already spreading far beyond the battlefield itself. What happened underground is now reshaping oil markets, maritime insurance calculations, global shipping routes, and Washington's strategic options in ways most headlines have barely begun to acknowledge. Because this story is not only about soldiers dying in tunnels beneath southern Lebanon, it is about the emergence of a new model of warfare where technological superiority alone no longer guarantees operational dominance. The first indication that something historically significant had happened did not come from press conferences or official military statements. It came from silence. For hours after the scale of the losses became known inside Israeli command structures, the government released almost nothing of substance. And in the world of military power, silence often communicates more than speeches ever can. Governments that achieve clear victories speak immediately. Governments trying to understand a shock they did not anticipate usually go quiet. That silence became the first signal to serious analysts that something extraordinary had occurred beneath the soil of southern Lebanon. While evacuation helicopters were reportedly pulling wounded and dead elite soldiers from the hills under cover of darkness, another front in the conflict opened simultaneously. Iran formally submitted a compensation demand totaling $270 billion directed at both Israel and the United States. That figure represented more than half of Iran's annual GDP. It was not chosen randomly, and it was not rhetorical theater. Tehran understood exactly what it was doing. The demand functioned as an economic missile launched at the precise moment the military trap underground was reaching maximum effect. Iran's message was brutally simple. You initiated this conflict, now you absorb the financial consequences. What made the moment so strategically significant was the synchronization. 2 battlefields operating simultaneously, one underground and physical, one economic and diplomatic, one inflicting casualties in confined tunnels beneath Lebanon, the other applying pressure through energy markets, insurance systems, and international financial narratives. That level of coordination was not improvised. It reflected years of strategic preparation unfolding according to long-term planning that Western analysts had repeatedly underestimated. To understand how this situation emerged, you have to go back to February 2026, when the United States and Israel launched one of the most ambitious coordinated operations ever conducted against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure. The campaign reached a historic turning point when Israeli intelligence successfully located and eliminated Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, the central architect of Iran's regional proxy strategy for more than 30 years. From Washington and Tel Aviv's perspective, the operation appeared decisive, but what followed revealed a catastrophic misreading of the system Iran had spent decades constructing. The response from Iran's regional allies was immediate and overwhelming. Hezbollah, widely regarded as the most capable non-state military organization in the world, escalated from sporadic rocket attacks into sustained coordinated bombardment across northern Israel. What began as retaliation rapidly evolved into a confrontation neither Washington nor Tel Aviv could fully control. Israel responded using the doctrine that had repeatedly worked in previous conflicts: overwhelming air power, large-scale mobilization, precision strikes, and technological superiority deployed at industrial scale. Within weeks, Israeli forces activated 5 full divisions and launched Operation Second Shield into southern Lebanon. At the spearhead stood the Golani Brigade with its brown berets, 78 years of battlefield history and reputation for aggressive frontline warfare. Israeli commanders believed the formula remained unchanged: superior training, superior intelligence, superior firepower. Historically, those factors had always delivered results, but hidden inside that assumption was a fatal miscalculation that would cost hundreds of lives before dawn broke again. At the same time, Iran was moving carefully on the diplomatic front. The $270 billion compensation figure was reportedly built from detailed calculations covering destroyed refineries, damaged ports, civilian infrastructure, and economic disruption caused by the bombing campaign. While Israeli aircraft struck visible Iranian targets above ground, Iran's actual strategic capabilities remained protected beneath mountains inside hardened facilities like Eagle 44. Much of what satellites photographed burning across Iran had reportedly been decoy infrastructure designed to absorb strikes and create the illusion of successful destruction. And that same philosophy of concealment had been replicated beneath southern Lebanon over 20 years of uninterrupted underground construction. Hezbollah did not respond to Israel's offensive with desperation. It responded with preparation. Beneath villages, roads, shops, and residential districts, Hezbollah had created something far beyond conventional tunnels. This was an underground military ecosystem: command centers, weapons depots, reinforced medical stations, interconnected corridors stretching for dozens of kilometers, escape shafts, ventilation systems, ammunition caches, entire sections engineered specifically for prolonged underground combat. Some entrances reportedly sat hidden beneath completely ordinary civilian businesses that had operated openly for years without attracting intelligence attention. One operational center allegedly functioned beneath a small clothing store in a busy commercial district. That level of concealment exposed a vulnerability Israeli military doctrine had never truly solved. Modern surveillance systems excel at identifying visible targets. Hezbollah removed visibility from the equation entirely. When Golani forces descended underground, they entered an environment where most of Israel's technological advantages became functionally irrelevant. These were not inexperienced soldiers. They were elite operators trained in some of the most advanced urban warfare techniques in existence. But underground warfare obeys different rules. At depths reaching roughly 25 meters beneath the surface, equivalent to descending 8 floors into reinforced rock, Israeli air superiority disappeared completely. F-35 fighters flying overhead became spectators, unable to influence the fight below. Precision-guided bombs costing hundreds of thousands of dollars found no viable targets. Merkava tanks, among the most sophisticated armored platforms ever built, struggled inside confined passages where engagement distances shrank from kilometers to mere meters. And inside those corridors, warfare reverted to its oldest form: training, positioning, terrain familiarity, reflexes. Hezbollah's Radwan fighters had spent years preparing specifically for this moment. These were not irregular militias improvising under pressure. These were combat veterans forged in Syria, trained with assistance from Iranian Revolutionary Guard advisors, and conditioned to operate underground with almost instinctive familiarity. They knew every shaft, every tunnel intersection, every prepared kill zone because many of them had physically built the networks themselves. Israeli units reportedly encountered ambushes emerging from vertical shafts and hidden lateral passages absent from available intelligence maps. Ammunition had been pre-positioned years in advance. Emergency medical stations and redundant communication systems had been built specifically to sustain prolonged underground combat. Hezbollah's original strategic doctrine, often referred to as the conquering Galilee concept, envisioned not merely defending Lebanese territory, but launching coordinated offensives into northern Israel itself. Israeli operations in 2024 had disrupted portions of that plan and eliminated several senior Hezbollah commanders, but they had not destroyed the physical infrastructure waiting beneath southern Lebanon. In fact, the ceasefire period between 2024 and 2025 reportedly gave Hezbollah exactly what it needed most: time. Every month of relative calm allowed new Iranian anti-tank missiles to enter Lebanon through Syria. Every week allowed new fighters to complete accelerated underground warfare training. Engineers repaired damaged tunnel sections, expanded escape routes, reinforced kill zones, and continued construction beyond satellite visibility. Israeli analysts interpreted Hezbollah as weakened and degraded. In reality, the organization was regenerating methodically beneath the surface beyond the reach of traditional intelligence systems. The historical parallel many analysts now draw is October 1973, when Israeli leadership underestimated Egyptian and Syrian preparations until the Yom Kippur War exploded into existence almost without warning. The pattern repeats constantly throughout military history. Great powers grow overconfident in technological superiority, while underestimating an adversary's capacity to adapt patiently over time, and nowhere was that more symbolically powerful than in Bint Jabil itself. The town carries enormous historical significance inside Hezbollah's narrative. In 2000, Hassan Nasrallah declared victory there after Israel withdrew from southern Lebanon following 18 years of occupation. In 2006, the town became one of the bloodiest battlefields of that war. In March 2026, history returned to Bint Jabil at an intensity that reportedly exceeded anything previously witnessed there. Israeli paratroopers from the 98th Division alongside Yahalam engineering units moved to encircle the urban perimeter, while armored columns advanced toward the stadium where Nasrallah had once celebrated victory. On paper, the operation appeared tactically sound: avoid reckless frontal assaults, cut supply lines, establish controlled encirclement, gradually reduce the defensive zone. For a brief moment, Israeli commanders believed the operation was unfolding exactly according to doctrine. Then the ground itself seemed to come alive. When Golani elements descended into the tunnel systems, they crossed into an environment designed specifically to destroy technologically superior forces. Drone operators watching high-resolution feeds from above saw only rooftops while soldiers died underground beyond the reach of air support. Merkava Mark, the fourth tanks, each valued around $4 million and considered symbols of Israeli military engineering excellence, found themselves trapped inside passages where engagement ranges collapsed into only a few meters. And inside that environment, a rifle in trained hands became more valuable than billions of dollars of advanced military hardware. The Radwan fighters waiting in those tunnels represented something qualitatively different from the enemies Israel had faced during most of the previous 2 decades. These fighters had studied Israeli operational behavior for years with the analytical intensity of military academics. They memorized the tunnel systems physically, instinctively, almost like musicians memorizing compositions through repetition in darkness. The intelligence failure was therefore not merely technical, it was structural. Israeli estimates before the battle reportedly placed Hezbollah's active strength in the southern sector between 6,000 and 7,000 fighters. During the fighting, those estimates had to be revised dramatically upward toward somewhere between 18,000 and 25,000 prepared combatants embedded across the underground network. That difference is not a minor miscalculation. It is the difference between confronting a localized defensive force and confronting an entire hidden military architecture developed quietly over years beneath the radar of every surveillance system pointed at it. Every satellite pass failed. Every intercepted communication failed. Every intelligence network failed to fully grasp the scale of what had been assembled underground beneath southern Lebanon. What happened beneath southern Lebanon was not simply another chapter in the long history of Middle Eastern conflict. It was the collision between 2 entirely different philosophies of warfare. On one side stood one of the most technologically advanced military systems ever assembled, backed by American intelligence, satellite surveillance, 5th-generation fighter aircraft, precision-guided weapons, artificial intelligence-assisted targeting, and billions upon billions of dollars invested in maintaining battlefield dominance. On the other side stood an underground network built slowly, patiently, and almost invisibly over 2 decades by an organization that understood one brutal truth better than most state militaries ever have. If you cannot defeat a technologically superior enemy in open terrain, you drag that enemy into an environment where technology loses its meaning. And that is exactly what Hezbollah achieved in the hills and tunnels surrounding Bint Jabil in March of 2026. The Golani Brigade entered southern Lebanon, carrying the weight of nearly 8 decades of battlefield mythology. These were not inexperienced conscripts or rear-line reservists. These were elite combat formations with reputations forged through urban warfare operations in Gaza, counterinsurgency campaigns across multiple theaters, and decades of continuous conflict. Inside Israeli military culture, Golani represented toughness, aggressiveness, and operational excellence at the highest level. But reputations built above ground do not necessarily survive below it. because underground warfare strips away almost every advantage that advanced militaries rely upon. Satellites become blind, air superiority becomes decorative, electronic warfare becomes unreliable, communications fracture, GPS loses coherence, drone feeds become useless, and suddenly combat reverts to something far older and far more primitive. Men with rifles moving through darkness measured not in kilometers, but in meters. Israeli commanders believed they were entering a difficult urban operation. What they actually entered was an engineered labyrinth specifically designed to consume modern military formations piece by piece. Hezbollah had not spent 20 years building isolated tunnels. They had constructed a subterranean battle space. There is a critical difference between those two concepts. Tunnels are passages. A battle space is an ecosystem. What Israeli forces encountered beneath southern Lebanon was an interconnected underground military architecture containing weapons depots, reinforced command centers, ventilation systems, emergency medical facilities, hardened communication nodes, escape shafts, ammunition caches, secondary firing corridors, and pre-mapped ambush positions layered across dozens of kilometers beneath civilian infrastructure. Some entrances sat hidden beneath ordinary storefronts and residential buildings that had operated in plain sight for years without attracting meaningful suspicion. One command node reportedly functioned beneath a small clothing shop inside a commercial district that Israeli surveillance had monitored countless times without identifying as militarily significant. And this is where the real strategic lesson begins to emerge. Western military doctrine has spent decades optimizing for visible battlefields. Precision warfare depends upon detection. Satellites identify targets, aircraft strike targets, drones monitor movement, data networks connect everything into one synchronized operational picture. But Hezbollah understood that the easiest way to defeat that model was not to challenge it directly, but to disappear beneath it entirely. Underground, the Israeli technological ecosystem fractured. F-35 fighters circling above southern Lebanon suddenly became spectators to a battle they could neither see nor influence. Multi-million-dollar Merkava tanks designed for maneuver warfare found themselves trapped in confined corridors where engagement distances collapsed into a few terrifying meters. Precision-guided munitions costing hundreds of thousands of dollars had no viable targets to strike because the enemy existed beneath layers of rock and reinforced concrete that air power could not reliably penetrate without destroying entire civilian sectors above ground. What unfolded next was not chaos, it was choreography. Hezbollah's Radwan units had spent years preparing specifically for this kind of confrontation. These fighters were not operating with improvised guerrilla instincts. They were executing a deeply studied operational doctrine refined through combat experience in Syria and shaped by Iranian Revolutionary Guard advisors who had spent decades analyzing Western military behavior. Every corridor, every junction, every tunnel intersection had been mapped into pre-planned kill zones. Israeli units advancing underground repeatedly encountered ambushes emerging from shafts and lateral passages that did not exist on any intelligence map available to commanders. Fighters appeared from darkness, disappeared into secondary tunnels, re-emerged behind advancing units, and exploited the confusion created by dust, smoke, echo distortion, and fractured communications. Veterans who survived the engagement later described conditions that bordered on psychological collapse. The underground environment itself became a weapon. Explosions inside confined rock passages distorted orientation and destroyed spatial awareness. Electronic systems malfunctioned under dense particulate conditions. Night vision optics degraded in the humid, debris-filled air. Radio signals bounced unpredictably through concrete and steel reinforcement. Soldiers who had trained for years in advanced urban combat suddenly found themselves fighting almost blind inside an environment where their opponents possessed total familiarity with the terrain. Hezbollah fighters had excavated these tunnels with their own hands. They knew every incline, every corner, every escape route instinctively, almost physically, the way a musician memorizes an instrument through repetition rather than conscious calculation. And the numbers that began circulating after the battle sent shockwaves through military establishments far beyond the Middle East. Israeli intelligence assessments prior to the operation estimated Hezbollah's southern combat strength at roughly 6,000 to 7,000 active fighters. During the fighting, those estimates reportedly had to be revised upward to somewhere between 18,000 and 25,000 prepared combatants embedded across southern Lebanon's underground network. That is not a small analytical error. That is an intelligence failure of historic scale. It meant that for years, every satellite pass, every intercepted communication, every surveillance program, and every informant network had failed to capture the true scale of what Hezbollah had quietly constructed beneath the surface. And while the underground battle consumed Israeli forces militarily, Iran was simultaneously applying pressure through an entirely different battlefield, economics. Tehran's $270 billion compensation demand directed at both Israel and the United States was not merely propaganda. It was strategic messaging wrapped in legal and financial language. Iran understood something that modern conflicts repeatedly demonstrate. Wars are no longer decided only by battlefield outcomes. They are decided by the interaction between military attrition, political endurance, financial pressure, media narratives, and public tolerance for sustained casualties. The timing of that demand mattered enormously. As Israeli units absorbed devastating losses underground, Iran launched an economic offensive designed to amplify uncertainty across energy markets, international insurers, shipping firms, and financial institutions already terrified by instability in the Eastern Mediterranean. The markets reacted instantly because global finance understands geopolitical vulnerability faster than politicians often do. Brent crude surged dramatically as leaked reports of Israeli losses circulated through commodity trading networks. Maritime insurance premiums around Lebanese waters spiked almost immediately. Shipping companies began reassessing Eastern Mediterranean transit risks. Infrastructure investment projects across the Levant entered periods of suspension as institutional investors recalculated regional exposure. What happened beneath southern Lebanon was no longer just a military story. It became an economic contagion event capable of rippling through global supply chains and energy pricing systems simultaneously. But the deeper issue here is not simply Hezbollah, Israel, or Iran individually. The deeper issue is that modern warfare is entering an era where technologically superior states are increasingly vulnerable to adversaries who specialize in strategic patience, concealment, and terrain manipulation. This is not unprecedented in history. In Vietnam, the United States possessed overwhelming air power, overwhelming industrial capacity, and overwhelming technological superiority. It still failed to achieve decisive strategic victory because its opponents understood that time itself could become a weapon. Iran and Hezbollah have studied those historical lessons carefully. Their entire regional strategy is built around extending conflicts long enough for political pressure inside democratic societies to outweigh battlefield objectives. And this is where the confrontation becomes profoundly uncomfortable for Washington and Tel Aviv alike. Democracies are extraordinarily powerful in short wars. They often struggle in prolonged wars where casualties accumulate without visible, decisive outcomes. Every soldier returned home in a coffin generates political consequences that authoritarian systems can often suppress more effectively. Hezbollah's underground doctrine is designed precisely around exploiting that asymmetry. The goal is not necessarily battlefield conquest in the conventional sense. The goal is endurance. Survive long enough, inflict enough losses, extend the conflict long enough that political support on the other side begins to fracture under cumulative pressure. That is why the silence from Israeli leadership in the first hours after the battle mattered so much. Governments that achieve clear victories move quickly to shape narratives. Governments confronting outcomes they do not yet fully understand often go quiet while attempting to regain informational control. That silence signaled something serious had occurred beneath southern Lebanon long before official casualty figures or operational details emerged publicly. And now military planners everywhere are studying what happened with extreme urgency because the implications stretch far beyond Lebanon itself. If underground warfare combined with decentralized command structures can neutralize major portions of advanced Western military superiority, then every future urban conflict changes fundamentally. Taiwan is studying this, Iran is studying this, Russia is studying this, China is studying this, even NATO planners are studying this. The lesson emerging from southern Lebanon is brutally simple. Technology alone does not guarantee dominance when geography, concealment, preparation, and strategic patience are weaponized effectively over decades. The world is entering a period where smaller regional actors increasingly understand how to exploit the vulnerabilities of large technologically advanced militaries. not by defeating them symmetrically in open battle, but by reshaping the battlefield itself into environments where conventional superiority collapses. Underground cities, distributed drone networks, decentralized missile systems, AI-assisted targeting combined with low-cost asymmetric tactics. This is not the future anymore. Southern Lebanon demonstrated that it is already here, and the most unsettling reality of all may be this. What happened beneath those hills was not improvised. It was prepared patiently over 20 years while much of the world assumed technological superiority alone would remain decisive forever. Supply routes linking Asia to Europe through the Suez Canal are now being recalculated under risk assumptions that did not even exist 6 months ago. Multinational corporations are quietly reevaluating investment strategies across Israel, Jordan, and Egypt as prolonged instability begins reshaping economic models that were built on expectations of relative regional predictability. What unfolded beneath southern Lebanon is already influencing decisions in Shanghai boardrooms, Frankfurt financial institutions, and New York trading floors simultaneously, and Washington now confronts a question it has avoided addressing publicly for years. Its strongest regional ally, backed by the full weight of American military technology, still cannot secure a decisive victory against Iranian-aligned forces that have spent 2 decades preparing specifically for this confrontation. Every additional dollar invested in fifth-generation warfare systems loses part of its value when adversaries deliberately move combat into environments where those systems become ineffective. The credibility of American deterrence throughout the region absorbs a measurable shock, one that defense analysts inside institutions like RAND are almost certainly studying in classified assessments already underway. Because if Israel, operating with extensive American support, cannot decisively neutralize Hezbollah, then what signal reaches Taiwan, South Korea, or other American partners in the Pacific whose security assumptions rely on the reliability of that same deterrent structure? That question is circulating quietly through State Department offices and European foreign ministries without any comfortable answer available. The strategic architecture constructed over the last 70 years is facing one of its most serious stress tests since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the reality emerging from southern Lebanon is likely to force a major reassessment of Western military doctrine. Absolute air superiority, the foundation of American military dominance since the Second World War, encounters hard limits against enemies operating underground with years of preparation behind them. Fifth-generation weapons platforms worth hundreds of millions of dollars become dramatically less relevant once combat moves beneath the surface. The armored superiority that defined victories from North Africa to Kuwait loses much of its meaning inside tunnels barely 3 meters wide. Satellite communications, drone surveillance, and advanced electronic intelligence systems struggle against opponents shielded beneath 25 meters of reinforced concrete and earth. This is not an isolated tactical problem. It represents a broader strategic shift that both state and non-state actors around the world are now studying intensely. North Korea, with its enormous tunnel infrastructure beneath the Korean peninsula, is paying close attention to every leaked detail emerging from the Bint Jabil operation. China, preparing contingency scenarios involving Taiwan, is examining how technologically superior forces can be constrained through terrain selection, concealment, and long-term preparation. The lesson is being absorbed simultaneously in Pyongyang, Beijing, Tehran, and numerous other capitals viewed in Washington as strategic adversaries. Hezbollah does not need to achieve a conventional military victory in the traditional historical sense. It only needs to demonstrate that it cannot be defeated at a political cost acceptable to Israel and its American allies over a sustained period of time.